So I would say safety first and try to solve it during the pre-market safety session. But we can come back later on that. Okay, so let's move to the next speaker, the panelist. I have to look at the smaller already. Maduas. And you are from Iran?
Yes, I'm actually.
Okay, use the microphone. Yeah, fine, but you need a microphone.
Yes.
We can use this one. To the microphone for. Okay.
Okay. So first, yeah, I'm going to introduce myself. So I am a lecturer in the population health at the vet school in Nantes, France, and I've been working on syndromic surveillance in cattle, which is why I've been invited. So I'm just waiting for this slide. Sorry. So my talk is going to be a bit different, obviously. I've discovered the MARLON project quite recently, so I'm not a specialist of GMP, but I've worked on surveillance, so it's going to be linked to what Louis presented this morning. Oh, sorry. So I'm going to talk to you about syndromic surveillance for the detection of emerging and re-emerging disease in cattle. And I'll try to make the connection with GMP. So here are a few instances of diseases that have emerged in the past, so maybe more 30 years than 20. So bovine spongiform encephalopathy, foot-and-mouth disease, bovine neonatal pancytopenia, Bluetongue virus, and Schmallenberg virus. And so these are diseases emerging or emerging because they were unknown or not present in the population. So that's their common feature. But on the other hand, they are all very different. So bovine spongiform encephalopathy was caused by an agent called prion. Spread very slowly over many years. Foot-and-mouth disease is caused by a virus, and it spreads like a fire very fast in the population. Bovine neonatal pancytopenia was a disease associated with a vaccine. And the last two ones, Bluetongue virus and Schmallenberg viruses, are vector, so viruses borne by small midges called culicoides. And for Schmallenberg virus, the virus was totally unknown before it emerged, so it has never been seen. So in this context, the relevance of targeted surveillance is limited because it's impossible to test for all known and unknown diseases that could emerge. So you can't go to a farm and take a sample, try to find antibodies or antigens because you don't know what you're looking for. So in this context, what you have to do is to look for the consequences of the disease or of the problem. So for instance, this would also work for GMP. And this is called syndromic surveillance. So really the aim is to detect a potentially unknown health disorder through their consequences. And it relies on the detection of abnormal events. So the detection must be precocious. And because you detect an abnormal but non-specific event, it must lead to further investigations that will allow the identification of the cause of the problem. So usually the way it works, you have to collect the relevant data. So you need to identify the sources of data that can be helpful to detect what's abnormal. Then you construct indicators or syndromes. And in this data, you look for unusual patterns and deviations. And the detection of these abnormal events leads to further investigations and actions. So this implies that all the data are collected and analyzed in close to real time. So now I'm going to talk to you about the example of the Bluetongue virus on which I worked. So the Bluetongue virus emerged in ruminants in northern Europe in 2006. So the disease was already known. It was progressing in the south of Europe, but the emergence in northern Europe in 2006 was unexpected. So we had a few cases in France in 2006, but the disease really emerged in 2007. And the notification of clinical suspicions was mandatory, so meaning that we had very complete data, and we could follow the disease progressing in France over the course of the emergence, and it spread in France until 2010 or 2011. So the disease has broad consequences on the population and harmful feasibility, such as reproductive disorders, abortions, mortality, or drop in milk production. So we teamed up with people from Rede in the Netherlands and Codacerva in Belgium to test indicators. So in the framework of syndromic surveillance, there's some indicators that could be used for detecting the Bluetongue emergence, but also for any disease that could emerge. And we tested indicators constructed from milk production and reproduction in dairy cattle for the detection of such emergencies. So one source of data we investigated was milk production. So we used milk recording, which is equivalent to DHI that was mentioned in the first talk of the afternoon. And with this, we have individual cow milk production collected monthly. So in France, it represents approximately 60% of dairy herds. So it's massive databases, and we can follow herds in time quite well. So we had statistical models to predict unexpected milk production on a herd per week basis. And what we did, we tried to identify clusters of milk productions that were lower than expected for the detection of this BTD emergence, as if we were in a real-time context. So if you're interested, this is published in a newspaper. We also used reproductive data. So something very common in dairy herds in France is artificial insemination, and we have data for every artificial insemination that happens in France. And we also have calving dates. So from this data, we constructed 5 indicators that we tested. And the best indicator was a proportion of cows calving a few days earlier than expected, which is this. Yes. So we did it for heifers and for cows. So I'm just going to show you for heifers, for cows. Sorry. So in black you have the observed data. So this is the indicator we get related. And here is the predicted, so fitted values. Okay? And here we tested the possibility of an emergence in 2007. And here you have the notified cases. Okay? So, and as you can see, we have an excess of these short gestations just at the start of the epidemics. Okay? And we use what we call a Fuson algorithm to detect this event. Again, this is published, so this has been published in the Journal of Dairy Science. You can find more details there. So just, yeah, what's interesting with this reproductive indicator, so the short gestation indicator, it is that it is an event that is in the range of normality. So if you weren't analyzing it with a statistical method, you wouldn't be able to detect it. And what I've done next is to show you on the map, on this map of France, the result of combining the two indicators for the detection of BTD. So here, each red square is a municipality with at least one notified case, and you will see the alarms appearing on the map. Okay, so we are week 31, so that's 3 weeks after the first case, and the disease is progressing through France. So because we were expecting it, it was well recorded. Notification was mandatory, so it's quite comprehensive. Okay, so this is progressive, and we get the first alarm, so an excess of short gestation here. On week 36, that is 8 weeks after the first observed case. Week 37, we get a few more. So these are departments, or administrative units. And for milk production, we use a different method. So we were getting circles. So which means that we had both excess of short gestations and low milk production in this area. This continues to progress, and we get a larger circle for drug milk production. Okay. So that was for the example, and I think what's interesting is to see how it would apply to the detection of consequences associated with the consumption of GM feed by cattle. So in our study, the most timely and specific indicator was short gestations. So again, pregnancies that were a few days shorter than expected, so not in the range of normality. So using I think this is inherent to the method because you don't know what you are looking for, so you just know that something is abnormal, but you don't know whether it's really abnormal or whether it's a random fluctuation. So every your alarms are a trade-off between having alarms that you are investigating for nothing and really detecting what you want to detect. So that's something you need to think about. So there is a trade-off between specificity and timeliness. And this can be improved by combining several indicators. So if you here, because so this was done afterwards, so we didn't formally assess it, but combining milk production and reproduction could help us be more sure that it's really a real problem. It's not something else. And so the essential part of this is data. So we cannot go without data. You need to identify data sources that really measure a broad range of biological phenomena because you want to you don't know what's going to be affected by either your virus or your field. So you need to identify the sources, their relevance, and also their availability, and who owns them. If you have, I know Europe, like movement data, the collection is mandatory, so you know when every cow or calf is born, when they are dead, and how they move between herds. So usually it's possible to get them within the country. But you also have industry data. So if you go to milk companies that buy milk, they don't want necessarily their competitors to know the volume they collect. And so you have to find ways to make people see the general interest and not compromise their own interests. So this is something that would need to be thought about. So yeah, really need to see the interest of sharing the data. And so the added value of syndromic surveillance can be questions. So we can reflect about what could have been achieved in past instances. So if we had detected BSE earlier or put-on-out earlier, would these sort of techniques would have helped? And this must be balanced against the cost of running the system. So we can also ask how should the cost be shared between public institutions and industry because both gains from detecting early. Okay, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Olivier. Remarks or questions on this approach? Would you recommend it for GMP? I mean, diseases, that's clear, but GMP?
I think once you have a system up and running, it doesn't matter whether it's disease or GM feed, it's going to detect things anyway. So there's an interest in having a system running, but then the investigations you conduct once you detect an alarm are the important things.
But then also probably this multivariate analysis, looking at more than one component is important.
Yes, it would be better to be able to combine various sources of data. They could be analyzed differently. and there may be a need for further research in that. Statistical methods to combine different streams of information.
Unfortunately, the commission is getting okay, thanks. Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not here much.
Yeah, Claudia has a question. You want to? Claudia.
Well, my question, if I didn't misunderstood, it doesn't matter if you use a multivariate or a univariate statistical approach. The point I think you said, if I didn't misunderstand, is that you observed some values that were, in any case, within what was considered a normal range of variability.
Yes.
So that is a challenge because how do you know a priori? The statistical method is a tool, is something that serves to identify a variability or.
Yes.
But there, well, how can you?
Because what you usually do is you test your models in a period of stability. So you have a baseline. You need to calibrate your model during a period where you are sure there is nothing going on. You detect a change from a baseline.
So you are looking in changes in pattern of variation with respect to what is considered normal variation.
Yes. Okay. Yes, so you have a degree of certainty associated with the real arm.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And the bigger the variation.
Yes. So it is really a problem of signal to noise ratio. So the better your model is, the better you can remove the unexplained variability, the more powerful it is to do.
This is a general problem.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Okay. Pablo. Next speaker, Pablo Steinberg from University of Hanover. And Pablo is involved in one of the running EU projects called GRACE. And he's going to update you on the latest progress.
Harry, I don't want to correct you, but
Yeah,
I'm
you
coordinator of another project.
Oh, this, oh, sorry, GRACE is later. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
So this is a project that has been initiated more than 1 year ago, and it's a 2-year carcinogenicity rat feeding study with the maize NK603. It might be known to you that Seralini and colleagues published in 2013 a very controversially discussed study in which they fed this genetically modified maize to rats, and they saw certain incidents of mammary tumors in the animals, and this I'm sure induced then the commission to give out a call. I think it's the last one in the brain program, in the 7th brain program, which was then adopted. And it's a collaborative project with around 3 million euros, and it started, as I said, the middle end of April last year. It's a collaborative project in the sense that a number of groups from Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, the Slovak Republic, and Austria are working together. And this is the most important part. That is the objectives of the GTWIST project is to elaborate a scientifically sound approach to evaluate the potential toxicity of genetically modified plants in whole feed. And what we use is, on the one side, the genetically made NK603, and we base our approach on the one side on a number of documents that have been given out by EFSA recommendations and statements, and we use the current OECD test guidelines. And you will see it in only in a few seconds. We are doing 90-day studies, and we are doing also combined chronic toxicity and carcinogenicity study. That is, we will have time points in 3 months, 1 year, and 2 years to see if there is any form of toxicity there. Another thing which we are working on and quite intensely is to define criteria to evaluate the scientific quality of long-term feeding studies. There are a number of publications there outside, and we are always confronted with the question, are they of a quality that could be used by the risk assessors to make the statements yes or no, and we're putting together a number of these quality criteria for the evaluation of such feedings. The next point is a very important one, also taking into account animal welfare, and that is when are long-term animal feeding trials scientifically justified? That is, to try to define the triggers for a long-term animal feeding trial. When I speak of a long-term, I'm speaking of 12 or more months until 24 months. These are feeding trials that have to take into consideration a very high number of animals, which are sitting for a very long time. For the rat, 1 year rat is about 30 years humans, and that is a question where we have to say, when is this scientifically, and naturally also there is the ethic question behind it, justified? And then the most important question is, which is their added value in the frame of a GMO risk assessment process. And something which I do think is important, and this is not always discussed very in detail, is on the one side, we want to have a total safety in the area of GMOs, but we don't tend to discuss much the question of if we're using, as in G-twist, I give you a number, between 1,000 and 1,100 rats to answer a certain question, then it is an important issue to think of this question here, scientifically justification of such a study, the added value of such a study, and what happens with the animals. There are a number of animals which you are using in the sense of animal welfare questions, and that we are looking at also. What we are going to do is, as has been done in RACE over the years, is to make accessible the detailed scientific information, including raw data, via the project website. We will have an open access database, and we will publish open access in the scientific literature. And we had a first stakeholder consultation, and we will have further ones in the near future. And then the important issue of communicating the results of the project and the significance for the GMO risk assessment process to the risk assessors, risk managers, a broad range of stakeholders, and the general public. And I won't go through all these study designs. I only make it clear we are planning 2 90-day feeding trials, one with a 11 and 33% inclusion rate of the maize, and the second one based on an explanatory statement of EFSA of going up to 50%. We can't do the 2 90-day feeding trials together because of an animal housing facility limitation, but we will have an answer to these questions. Is there an nutritional imbalance when you go up that much with a certain maize concentration? And we will do a third, and that is a combined chronic toxicity carcinogenicity trial, which will start in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pablo. Any comments on this approach? Really interesting project. Now, this possible higher dosing, are you going to do what, a pilot experiment?
We're going to do a 90-day feeding trial.
Yeah.
And we had a long-lasting discussion if we would go up with to the concentration of 50%, if we went for a long-term study.
Yeah.
And we decided not in the long-term studies to go that up, because there is the possibility that we lose quite a number of animals, and in the end, we end up with nothing.
Yeah.
So we are going up to 33% in the 1 to 2 year study, but we are going up to 50% in the 90-day feeding trial. So at least we will see if there's always this question, is 50%, if the maize is 50% of the feed, if it leads to a certain nutritional imbalance or not. This is something that was asked, was recommended, and this is something we haven't done up to now. In, for example, with the MON 810 studies, we haven't gone that up, but we go up here. Because there is a problem, only to make it very clear, that there is a problem in the end with the concentration of protein which you have in the feed. If you have, you should have 14 to 16%. If you go up in in the end, all animals will end up with a kidney damage, most probably. And these are things that we have to take into account, and that it was too risky for me to go for a 12 or 24-month study, and in the end, I end up with 10 animals per group, and I can't do any sort of conclusion.
But you may run into problems with the 90-day study as well.
We'll see.
Protein content.
We'll see. There is a study based, the EFSA explanatory statement cited a study in which they went with that up, and there was no problem.
Okay, good. Any other questions? So, I can't see. Oh, the finger, yes. Kristen. Did we need that very short?
Yeah, as
Okay.
always, as always. On looking on the Seralini study, it's one of the most relevant things, the impact of glyphosate for the glyphosate group. And so my question is whether you have some kind of quality standards assessment for the concentration of glyphosate in the food, in the meat, and why you did not include this as a comparative group to be on the safe side to say yes, we did very similar study as the one.
To the first question, definitely we are determining in the different charges of the feed we're giving to the rats the glyphosate concentration to give a quantitative number. I absolutely agree on that. And the second question, we had that at the stakeholder meeting. I tell it in the room, the European Commission didn't want to have a risk assessment or a feeding trial on glyphosate alone. Clear-cut discussion with the reviewers, and that we commented, and it was a clear no.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, then thank you, Marlon. Joachim. The subject was already pre-announced by myself by mistake. Joachim, we'll talk about this GRACE project, which is almost coming to an end, isn't it?
Yes, end of this year.
Okay, good. That was everything. Go ahead.
So short introduction into the GRACE project, which is the acronym for GMO Risk Assessment and Communication of Evidence. And I'm the coordinator of the GRACE project. The major goal of the GRACE project is to increase the transparency, traceability, and accessibility of information dealing with potential risks and benefits associated with the deliberate release of genetically modified plants and their products. When Harry asked us a little bit to talk about the relation between GRACE, between our projects and MARLON, so we are just on the other side of the coin. So we are trying to broadening the scientific basis for pre-market risk assessment. And of course, as better we will be, as less effort is necessary for the post-market monitoring. There are four main points considered in the frame of GRACE. The first is to provide a systematic and structured quality assessment of existing evidence linked with genetically modified plants and products derived from them. Then to identify knowledge gaps regarding the impacts of genetically modified plants. Then the third point, testing designs and identifying scientific values and limits of feeding trials. Both 90-day, so subchronic, and 1-year chronic toxicity trials, and in vitro studies with whole food feed. And the fourth point, providing an open access database and the central access point for reviewed studies and further data relevant to the impact of genetically modified plants. Here's a scheme organized according to different work packages. I will shortly go to this point here. We are performing several reviews so-called systematic reviews on 3 topics. First topic is health impacts caused by genetically modified crops. Then the second is a review on socio-economic impacts resulting from the cultivation of genetically modified crops. And the third is a review of environmental impacts. But the points we will discuss linked with MARLON are the efforts on toxicological studies. The evaluation and recommendation on methodologies is one important point. Then to perform subchronic and chronic toxicity studies, and to look into alternatives, in vitro studies, also different omics performed with plant material and also with animal material. And very important, a task force in between to try to link both aspects and also to provide additional toxicological expertise. So, for example, Pablo is a member of the task force, or Annette Pöting and other experts in toxicology. GRACE has also a political implication, therefore we have a lot of fun all the time working with GRACE. The point behind this is that the implementing regulation requests for the mandatory performance of 90-day feeding trials, and of course this is a matter of discussion. You might recall that EFSA had another science-based opinion on that issue. But as it is also stated in the implementing regulation, the Commission shall review the requirement of these 90-day feeding trials on the basis of new scientific information, and the Commission shall in particular monitor the outcome of the research project called GRACE. And then latest in June next year, the Commission shall provide a report about that review process. But of course, the results provided by GRACE have to be put into a broader context of worldwide existing knowledge. We are closely working together with GTWIS and with the French project. As Pablo already said, GTWIS is working with NK603, grown in Canada, and we, in the frame of GRACE, are working with 1A10, grown in Spain. And we have been performing 2 90-day feeding trials, and the results have already been published in Archives of Toxicology, also together with a very nice paper on statistical analysis. Then the chronic toxicity 1-year study has been finalized, so we are just putting all the data together and are doing the statistical analysis. Then, in addition, another 90-day trial has been performed, but aiming to detect some biomarkers for toxicologic effects. And because we have been taking blood and urine samples quite often, we decided to separate that from, let's say, a standard 90-day feeding trial test. And in addition, in vitro assays with primary cell lines are performed, which I think are very successful. And in addition, a lot of omics, also different kinds of omics, are performed with animal and plant material. The fourth point in my introduction was dealing with communication and with data to provide data for the public debate and for policy decisions. And that is done by our database, CADIMA, Central Access Database for the Impact Assessment of Crop Genetic Improvement Technologies. And CADIMA is linking GTWIS together with GRACE, together with another French project funded by the French government. and also with other EU projects like Presto, for example. And of course, we would be more than happy also to link it with the database produced in the frame of MARLON. I think a disadvantage of a lot of these databases is that they are dying or fading away after the research project has been ended. In the case of Kadima, it is absolutely sure that Kadima will be continued in the frame of GRACE, in the frame of GTWIS, but further by funding of our ministry and our institute. What I think is unique with GRACE and will be followed in the same way with GTWIS is a very broad involvement of stakeholders. Stakeholders have been involved already in the planning phase. So we have been discussing, for example, all the study plans together with the stakeholders, and we made several changes in the study plans. Then we have been discussing the data. We have been discussing also the interpretation of the data, those data which are published now. And of course, stakeholders will be involved also in discussing further results and in providing interpretations and conclusions. So therefore, do not expect from me now here that I will tell about some conclusions, recommendations based on GRACE, because this needs clear stakeholder involvement, and I will not do it before stakeholders have been involved in interpreting our data and our results. So the dates for this process, and those of you who are interested should save the dates, are 2 stakeholder workshops in October this year in Vienna. The first on the systematic reviews, the evidence synthesis, and the second on the feeding and alternative studies on genetically modified maize. And the final conference will be organized in Potsdam, in Germany, from November 9 to 10. And in the final conference, of course, we will be providing a summary of our data, conclusions, and recommendations, but we will also put our data into a broader context, also linking that with responsible research and innovation issues, stakeholder involvement, communication, and so on. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Joachim. Any remarks? Yes.
I'm not responsible for GMOs, but just a question about this database and this communication. When you speak about communication, I think your stakeholders are more farmers, professionals of agriculture, scientists, competent authorities. Do you foresee to communicate also to other parts of the food chain, like consumers, environmental organization, or this project is only more focusing on those who has to make legislation or who has to feed animals or to advise like professionals of the agricultural sector? Because the main problem we have in Europe is the communication of about GMOs, and it's something we need to improve.
Yeah. On our stakeholder workshops, stakeholders from a lot of different stakeholder groups have been involved. Also, stakeholders which are linked with the use of animals. So, for example, animal welfare stakeholders, animal protection stakeholders, and I think also their voice was very important to find the balance. On one side, for the need to perform these toxicological studies, on the other, already mentioned, to use more than 1,000 rats, for example, in the frame of one of these projects. Also, farmers are involved. So we have been inviting about 700 different representatives of different stakeholder groups. And in our workshops, we had a participation of 50 to 60 to 70 of them. And the only group we have been excluded have been journalists, because we wanted to have an open discussion and not the situation that remarks you are providing there you find back then the next day in the newspaper or in the TV or whatsoever. And I think that was a very wise decision, because we had very open-minded debates all the time. The stakeholder conferences were extremely helpful for us, also to sharpen our study plans, to avoid mistakes, and to find a good balance between different needs of different stakeholder groups.
Anybody else? If not, thanks a lot. Now, I think we enter now the last phase of this session, which is more open, general debate. We're supposed to close at 4:30, so. Anybody here in the audience who would like to make some remarks on what we have heard today? We can't talk about the outcome tomorrow, but at least today. And if I may start, looking in the GMO area of the availability of massive amount of data worldwide, not only in Europe, but worldwide, regarding the safety for food, feed, but also the environment. There's no category of foods which have been more extensively investigated than GMOs compared to other foods. If you look at the dossier on conventional product and compare it with the dossier for the GM product, there is no comparison. Claudia knows everything about it, me too. So there is this massive amount of data, which brings me to the question and these data are primarily gathered during the pre-market safety assessment by applicants and then evaluated by EFSA and other regulatory authorities. Is there really a need for post-market monitoring, looking at those massive amounts of data? This may sound a bit provocative, but let's try to get the things sharp here. We were discussing this morning the fact that if you find an issue during your pre-market assessment, then you could continue doing further toxicological experiments. Or if you think, well, that is too limited as a model, because I want to include certain sensitive segments of the population, so you may want to do some kind of post-market monitoring. I recognize that. But we should be aware of the added value and of the power of these models. I mean, in epidemiology, we all know there are a lot of confounding factors present. We are dealing with high variations in certain parameters among the population, which broadens the baseline quite a bit. And then one should ask himself, well, is that the right model to go on to create an added value for your assessment? That is still an issue, I think, to be tackled. And I would say if there is an hypothesis-driven element here, that you have detected some kind of effect, or you have seen lack of data, then I would say just continue your pre-market assessment. And as a last resort, maybe post-market monitoring, maybe. But there may be other views on this. Yes, okay. Yeah, you need a microphone. Oh, okay.
I think it might be useful to to draw the parallel to the environmental post-market monitoring, where we are distinguishing between general surveillance and case-specific monitoring. And I think that is very important. And so also different tools have been developed for it. So in the case of general surveillance, we have been developing 4 different tools. One are the pharma questionnaires. The other are to use the already existing networks. So like butterfly monitoring, for example, and other environmental monitoring networks. And there are not only hundreds, there are thousands of available in Europe. Not all of them are really useful for our ideas on monitoring, but some of them are very useful. It's only necessary to put the data together and to try to come to some conclusions on the basis of this data. Then the third point is the surveillance established by the industry, so by the applicants. And the fourth, of course, are the international available data. So I think that is already working quite well for the general surveillance. And there are some points which need further consideration. So therefore, we have been establishing that case-specific monitoring. And the reason is that from the small scale field experiments, you cannot conclude in all cases to large scale commercial use. And just to give you 2 examples, in the case of BT plants, there's a case-specific monitoring to look for possible resistance development against BT, so in target organisms. And concerning herbicide tolerant plants, there's case-specific monitoring to look into possible generation of herbicide-resistant weeds. So I think these are 2 clearly defined cases where the case-specific monitoring is necessary.
Yeah. I know the approach for the environmental assessment, but the question is here, would you advocate that approach for food safety assessment as well? Also, no. Okay. I think the fundamental thing for food safety assessment is whether you have a hypothesis to be tested or not. If you don't have a hypothesis to be tested, then very few parameters may be available in the human area to look at. For instance, allergenicity. I'm still amazed by the fact that when for instance, kiwi was introduced in the US in the 50s, last century. And it turned out that kiwi is an allergenic product. That turned out to be immediately picked up in the US by a very precise and defined good system for allergenicity report. That was a matter of weeks that they discovered that kiwi is a problem. So allergenicity is, I think, a parameter you could closely follow once a product is on the market. And I'm not sure whether there are very many parameters available when products are on the market and the population is exposed to test for it. We have listened this morning to certain presentations, and tomorrow there's a follow-up on epidemiology. It all depends on the power of the experiment you're looking at and the availability of the background data and the quality of the background data, which makes it very difficult to have a standard approach for post-market monitoring of products anyway. And that's what EFSA says as well. I mean, when appropriate, that is not exactly the guidance we want, but you cannot go much further than that, unless there are other ideas here in the audience. Ooh. Yes, the well-known finger there, in the back. Christopher.
So one hypothesis which might be relevant, for example, you could test this with genetically engineered soybeans made resistant to glyphosate have an impact on the reproductive system. You know, soybeans have endogenous hormonal active proteins, whatever compounds. And you also know that there is some suggestion of some scientists saying also glyphosate has some hormonal activity, so you could combine these things and a kind of disruptive activities. You could combine these and monitor the residues spraying into the soybeans, which might raise because of the herbicide resistance in some states, which might escape during pesticide risk assessment because it's very specific, and try to get some adequate clinical or whatever criteria to be applied on dairy cows, for example. This would be wrong on pigs. This would be something which is quite relevant because it was discussed several times to have a proper hypothesis, and I think it would also be possible to have the data being established. And then the other thing you mentioned, allergenicity. I think this is really difficult in animals, as far as I know. So this would not be the best idea maybe to look for. But immune response in animals, yes. Non-IgE immune response. There is also something you could derive from the data and build up a hypothesis. For example, if you would combine several plants presenting BT, producing BT toxins, this might, as a hypothesis, increase the immune reaction to genetically engineered plants. You could try. There are several things you could develop which you cannot test pre-market because they may be too complex. They might also derive under certain farm conditions, practical conditions, or might then be influenced by combinatorial effects. You have 60 genetically engineered plants allowed for import. In this combination, they were never tested. So go there and try to find make some assessment in which combinations there are fed in real in Europe, and try to find out if this is combinatorial effects so yes, I think this would be possible, but I'm aware we don't want to do animal studies. We do not want to do. We do not want to do monitoring. We just want to do as less as possible.
No, my question, listen, my question was different. I was talking about the fact that you can do any type of experiments as long as you have a good hypothesis. Now, whether your hypothesis on glyphosate and the GMOs is a good one, that's for another debate. But we needed hypothesis for precise and exact testing. That's the problem.
Yeah,
if you don't have it,
yeah, I gave you 2 examples.
No, you did already. If I am allowed to speak, if you don't have a good hypothesis, then you are bound to systems which are not specific in detection, and you have to be aware of the fact that the power of these systems are very, very low. Most cases, like an animal feeding trial, 90-day study with the product. It's not the best type of experiment. So we are struggling as pre-market assessors, as toxicologists, to find the right way. And my view is that if there is an hypothesis, okay, you go on, you do all the testing you need before you go to the market, and don't use market introduction as a test system, because I'm a propagandist of safety first before you put a product on the market. Whatever ideas you have, that's
you will not see in pre-market because they do not have maybe the combination of feed, which is then based on the market for real. You have to do some post-market monitoring. It's the law, and you also need some hypothesis for this kind of post-monitoring. That's why your question, if I understood you right, there are some questions which are not answered by pre-market risk assessment, and then have to go to the post-market monitoring.
Well, I would strongly plead for pre-market modeling, because there you can combine things in concentrations and exposure levels you want. You can simulate the things you would like to investigate. That's the power of pre-market assessment. Much better than post-market monitoring. Anybody else? Before we end up as a debate between Christopher and myself. Anybody else? Some other ideas? Case.
Thank you very much. I guess a lot of suggestions we hear are actually not suggestions for post-market monitoring, but for a more controlled type of study, you know, the larger animals. And I guess the problem is that larger animals, you know, when we think of larger livestock, we hear a lot about dairy cattle. Of course, those are very costly and difficult experiments, perhaps. But what I'd like to stress is that, you know, we are now narrowly focused on GM feeds, and of course there's a regulatory requirement for that for good reasons. I think, you know, when we talk about feeds and whole feeds, there are also other considerations that come into place. I think one of the considerations for also even some authorities recommending this as a topic of research was considered that actually monitoring in animals might be you know, more attractive because there you have perhaps larger quantities of GM feeds being consumed, homogeneous populations and such, perhaps even better controllable conditions, and also the animal working as a sentinel for human health. That was a kind of secondary consideration we heard from some stakeholders. Another thing is that, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, possible interactions, side effects. I've heard glyphosate residues. Of course, that's actually a pesticide issue, but of course we do have herbicide tolerant GM crops, so logically the issue will pop up. But it's at the interface between pesticide and GM. So actually, one should of course should deal with this under the pesticide risk assessment. And also within a food and feed, you can have lots of other components possibly interacting with each other. So this gets a lot of attention, of course, when we deal with GM, particularly stacked GM events. But it's interesting to not to lose sight of the context and think of all the other feed ingredients that might be there. And I think there also the project offers value because we're now seeing a lot of novel feed ingredients entering the market. And perhaps there, unlike the GM, you have perhaps less well-defined products or completely new products, for which you might be even more eager to ask for post-market monitoring because of the, you know, the uncertainties that are still left after your pre-market risk assessment.
But can you, well, you mentioned the word uncertainties, which I always
yes,
try to avoid, but talking about new products, and you said, well, there are new products, novel foods coming, so the uncertainties increases. Why during pre-market assessment? Why do you say that? Why?
Well, in some cases we have completely new products. Take, for instance, a product from synthetic biology with completely new properties, organisms that we've never seen before, completely new amino acids, nucleic acid sequences, you know, as well as, for instance, completely new feeds, for instance, derived from sources like insects, which are being promoted now by some people as an alternative to, you know, other sources of protein. So I think the novelty of those feeds, I mean, when we talk of GMOs, we usually have a comparator. We can focus on a minor difference between GM and comparator. But in that case, you'll have a completely novel thing. So besides all that we know, you might have something completely new being introduced into the feed chain as a hazard. You know, like you indicated yourself, kiwi. You know, we might have a completely new exotic fruit being introduced as a feed or food. So we may compare it to all the allergens, for instance, that we know, but who's going to tell us that this is not a new allergen in its own right? So that's just an example. So it's the novelty also that adds up.
Why you bring here a curious argument, Gijs, and that is that the current approach in toxicology for food and feed safety assessment may not be adequate. That's what you're saying. We may encounter new products. I would say if there is a new product, there's a new type of amino acid, do the assessment. As you do it always, whether it's a new chemical or a biological, doesn't matter. You do the assessment. And what I'm trying to say is, well, the pre-market assessment for GMOs up to now is, as I said, is massive. It's enormous compared to other foods. Do we really need post-market monitoring? Maybe. If you think we need it because, and that is an argument, what I'm going to say now, because of the consumer. The consumer may be more reassured if animal experiments have been done with this new GMO product. If so, then we should do it. And the Commission is really supporting the idea of taking consumer concerns into account. That's, I think, fundamentally, that was also the motive to have this routine assessment of every GM product made. So yeah, that is an argument, reassurance for the consumer. Would you buy that as an argument, or would you say, well, there is no scientific basis to do it? What's your view on that? Yes? And then Claudia, because I was ignoring you a long time. Susan.
Yes, I think that you are into it. I'm not an expert in this field, but I have followed it for a long time. And actually, when you have stakeholders, you have one of the speakers already said, I don't know, I have 700 stakeholders, and they were probably not specialists, and we have identified animal welfare, and there's a lot of argument by stakeholders who doesn't have the scientific competence. It's similar as here, but there are a lot of opinions, and I think it's a very tricky thing to see how far shall we go, and when it ends up to be a political decision, and maybe you're right, you're experienced in this area to say that, okay, this science say this, but now political say this, so that we do this in science, but perhaps you should say, okay, we don't agree, but more marketing for political reason, or put it in a nicer word, we do. But I don't know how to address it, because when it becomes, yeah, I think it's a very tricky question, but it needs to be addressed.
Well, I was going to ask a question that comes before the decision whether or not to do that. But this morning, from what I heard from the presentation as an outcome of the MARLON and the I heard that there are many problems, that it's very difficult to do. I heard a lot of difficulties that have been listed. So my question is, how is the MARLON project going to help us? Are these problems that have been identified solvable, unsolvable? I mean, what is the really concretely the outcome in that respect of the project? Because I think that before deciding whether or not we need it, we should also decide whether or not we can do it. So that's my question to the project.
Thanks. You're first.
So, one of the objectives was to identify, of course, research gaps, of course, and then, you know, it's not a recommendation identification of research gap, for instance, but of course, then we need to devise ways to address those gaps, and of course, it's up to the risk manager and policymakers to decide how important is this to, address this issue, what are the priorities at policy level. So I realize this is a very high level in the general answer. So what we do is we identify research gaps. We may have a number of solutions and suggestions, you know, like perhaps have more intensive moderation, perhaps perform syndromic surveillance, because, you know, in the absence of open data, that's, I think, the best you can do. And there are also systems in place. So, sorry for being so general and high level, but I think the best we can do is identify issues. In some cases, suggest, you know, alternative options and what we think is the best. But we'll also be out to the policymaker, because we also state the number of cases that, say, you may not have found was indicated for a certain effect. But on the other hand, it may never show up as a problem in the future. So, a lot of things we develop, of course, have the purpose of assisting potential monitoring needs in future, but we don't have a concrete question or request for monitoring actually on the table. So it may never come actually. It may come tomorrow, but it may also never come. Basically, our dilemma and problem in the project if you don't know what's going to be requested.
Thanks, guys.
Yes. Yes, but I need a micro.
You need to micro.
Was before.
Who was before? So that's fine. Although,
Well, this is a
who
short
wants to
question.
make, Eve? Oh, I thought first Anneli, then you. Since you have the microphone, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead with the
Yeah.
question and then you continue. So, Eve from ESTA, and actually talking about the research gaps or knowledge gaps. And this morning, and I understand two things. One is that there is some information gaps in the feed production chain, and so this resulted in the fact that the dietary exposure via feed and cannot be attributed very quantitatively to the GM material. And I think it was very clear. And another talk I heard is actually with the existing syndromic surveillance system, we do have model the health parameters. And then in the talk by Marta this morning, it was actually very interesting that you have the table. You showed that in the Catalonia area, you do have areas that the animal feed contains either with or without the GM names. And so my question is, if we have to deal with the knowledge gap of linking the exposure data strictly with the surveillance data, and actually have you ever analyzed the syndromic data by comparing the different regions and to see that despite this knowledge gap, whether or not the syndromic surveillance monitoring or the model can still be applied, I think that would be a solution. So I actually would like to ask the two speakers whether or not you have put the data together, analyze it.
Can you?
We don't have applied the epidemiological model in the area because we are concerned that all the cows in Girona are fed some GMO because of soil. So all the cows are going to be exposed to something that is probably a GMO feed. So it's not going to be a pure system. Those that are fed with the corn silage from seeds cultivated seeds of GMO, the exposure probably is going to be higher than those that are fed a non-GMO corn silage. But the exposure will be on both parts.
But Marta, can we do better in the exposure quantification? That's a big problem with this project. Having listened to some of the speakers.
You can do better.
And should we do better?
Not in the exposure.
Yeah.
Again, if you don't know the text, you're not looking from a specific text. It doesn't make sense to improve the exposure, to quantify exposure, if we don't know what we are looking for.
Well, I'm not sure whether I agree, because even if we have no knowledge on possible adverse effects, it would be good to know to how much are these animals exposed. That's an answer to the public as well. See what I mean?
I think that's because we have information.
But is this something you will discuss later on in your consortium meeting as a possible follow-up? Because I was quite depressed on presentation some time ago of Ralph Einstein here, with all his data, and the quantification was not there, and that depressed me quite a bit. I thought, well, this is an area where we have good quantitative information on exposure. And it turned out not. It's very difficult to get that information. And Spain, as a more isolated region, could be a good model to do more on quantification of exposure.
I think the concentration could be done to do more pressure in the plant substance.
Yeah.
But once you know the exposure, then what are you looking for the production data for what?
Once you have the exposure data, then I would say, well, at those levels, there is not a health problem. Full stop. That's an answer. Yeah. Because exposure with animals is far higher than the average human consumption of GMs through oil and whatever.
But in the case of Catalonia, again, exposure all animals will be exposed. But the level of exposure would be okay. You can compare farms that have the high level of exposure and the low level.
But we were saying,
Well, that's part of the background. Huh?
you also have the data from the region where there was no exposure. So
Yeah.
you have, let's say, a control. So you could compare different exposure levels with a non-exposure and compare the different doses to one which is zero. That would
But there is no zero.
no zero. Because I said that we had the area where organic we have the different.
Because soybean is always there.
Okay.
Yeah.
You would like to
Yes,
make a comment?
I would like to comment on two things. For the question of post-marketing monitoring, I am talking about feed additives for which some of them we request to present a plan. Doesn't mean that we accept the plan and that we require the post-marketing monitoring because sometimes it's not necessary. So it's on a case-by-case basis. But I agree that post-marketing monitoring cannot replace pre-market assessment. So if we have in our dossier something that can be done by pre-market assessment, we should do it. We cannot replace post-marketing monitoring, pre-market assessment by post-marketing monitoring. That is clear. But in the real life, there are some cases where we don't know how this product is going to work in the real world, because the real world is not always the same as our specific studies, or there are some interactions that we don't know unless we put that on the market. And then we face with the real world the different interaction with the chemical substances that we never foreseen before. No? So to some extent, for some specific cases, we need a post-marketing monitoring, but cannot replace the pre-marketing assessment. We cannot use post-marketing monitoring to replace the assessment before the placing on the market. And on the MARLON project, I think for me this morning has been also very difficult to see how we can manage the monitoring of the use of GMO plants on the animal. What is the exposure? It seems to be very complicated because the baseline is not clear because they are spread all over the world. There are species that for sure they always take GMOs. On the other hand, as you say, the exposure is not very clear. What is the level of exposure? We only have a niche market, which is organic farming, but the method of production of organic are so different that we cannot compare. So I find it's really very difficult, from my modest point of view, to reach any conclusion of this MARLON project, because at least we have to go deep in some areas and to try to refine the way we can search. But we have to search health parameters, okay, but some health parameters are influenced by other things, not only by GMOs. So how to distinguish because the American lady put a very interesting issue, but we don't know if these changes are due to the GMOs introduction or but because they improve the method of production or they change the. It's very, very complicated, but in any case, I think you are doing an excellent job just to start to know what is happening.
Let's ask Alison. Is she still there? Alison? Or did you go back and sleep?
She's still in.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah. I'm not asleep. So it's an interesting conversation we're having.
Have you got any comments on what you heard?
Yeah, I guess I would echo the statements regarding the need for some sort of a biologically plausible hypothesis of what effect you're looking for to look in these populations. I mean, how much study would be enough? There's hundreds of studies, there's 15 years of experience with many different genetically engineered crops, and as I sit here listening to, well, let's look at all of the different permutations and combinations, I think it's very difficult to design experiments for that, especially in the absence of a biologically plausible hypothesis as to how these, basically how this breeding method is causing some type of perturbation in the populations. And so I would really strongly echo the need for a biologically plausible hypothesis, because in the absence of that, it's really just a fishing trip, and you'll find random differences, but you'll have no way to determine whether it's just correlated with the use of genetically engineered crops or is an effect of or caused by, so to speak. And I appreciate the comment of the last lady who mentioned that we can't say that any of the trends in the livestock data are associated or due to the use of genetically engineered crops. I think the strongest conclusion I could draw is that the livestock production and health trends are not apparently being affected in a negative direction, which you might expect if in fact they were having deleterious impacts on the health of the animals. And so I guess as being a devil's advocate is how much study is enough. There are literally hundreds of studies that have been done, and at what stage do you say that sufficient studies have been done? Because asking for ever more studies really it can go on forever. And I think it's an important consideration, the amount of time and energy that's spent on this particular breeding method, safety studies, when, as one of the other speakers brought up, we don't do analogous studies on other breeding methods or other foods. And so what is it about this particular breeding method that necessitates this level of scrutiny? Because there's costs involved with it, and where is the appropriate balance of saying enough study has been done at this point? And I hear you guys struggling with that question. I don't have a good answer, but I'm not sure that I see a way to say definitively that it's where enough is enough.
Alison, yeah, thanks for your comment. I have a question to you. Is post-market monitoring, is that an issue in the US?
Well, I think legally any food that goes to market is legally required to be safe. And if there is a post-market effect, then the FDA would act on that. So there is no official post-market monitoring of genetically engineered crops once they've been quote-unquote deregulated by the USDA. But if a problem occurred where, I don't know, all the cows eating a particular variety tipped over dead or something, then the FDA would absolutely be, triggered and would go after the people that brought that product to market. So there's no official post-market monitoring, but there is the requirement that all food be safe, and anyone that breaks that law would be breaking the law, and the FDA would go after them.
Good. Thanks. The gentleman over there. You would like to make a comment or?
Thank you. Professor Vincent from the MARC on that, but a general comment, if I may, short one. I think that I often make this comment actually here. I mean, the issues we are faced with today have reached such a level of complexity that academics, experts, politicians, and the authors are getting completely out of their depth. Why? Because they are faced with integrated interdisciplinary challenges, something that their education has not prepared them for. The existing educational system is not sufficiently powerful to enable us to deal with the complexity of the challenges we are faced with. We must turn to decommission tomorrow, and this is what we are working on.
Okay, thanks. Christopher?
General comment, some similar was raised before. I'm a little bit disappointed about MARLON as a general. Now we hear the US not do post-market monitoring, of course, they have a complete other system. We hear that Mr. Kolper does not think the monitoring is necessary. We are debating a lot of things which are very general, which are not in our hands. I think the task of MARLON would be to provide us with some technical tools how to get the relevant data in future and to enable us to discuss it in a reasonable way, to develop a system, to get the data, not too expensive, but in a reliable way, and have a better knowledge about post-marketing effects which occur after marketing, as required by the European framework. And I did not hear a lot about it. Since I'm here, I did nearly hear nothing really new on post-marketing systems. Maybe tomorrow we do have a better discussion, but so far I'm pretty much disappointed about this. Sorry.
Okay. That's a pity, Christopher. Yeah, you may hear more tomorrow. Yeah. But by the way, I want to correct you in your statement about me. I mean, I did not say post-market monitoring is not necessary. There may be cases, as Claudia also explained, that post-market monitoring is a good tool. And the other thing, which you should not forget, as I said, there is a reassurance aspect here as well for the general public, which can be very valuable for certain products. Okay. Before closing, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I bring something more, but what I thought when I dealt with similar areas is that the best thing we can do is actually risk assessment, like we have it within the EFSA framework, where all experts are coming in, all are challenged, and we have a strategy according to how we should discuss the problem. And everybody comes, all arguments comes on the table, and you can have a different opinion and so on. And I don't think we can do it in a better way. And one thing, we must trust science in a way. And one thing I thought about doing an experiment like post-challenge or like you said, post-marketing or something like that. Do that also because the side of politicians want it, the public want it. Then I think I had a son who's schizophrenia, and then I have learned something. I thought of it's very valuable because the schizophrenic people, they are psychotic people. He can say, for example, I don't drink water, and he can do anything, and he can destroy all public when you are. And the worst thing you can do is to say, okay, don't take this water. I bring you tea instead. And you do it just to have a calm liver. And for the schizophrenic people, this is the worst thing you can say, because then you think, okay, then there is something anyway with the water. So I think if we go in and say, like in the XI, and all experts say, this is enough, this is what we can up with. And then the politicians said, but do another, okay, we do another experiment, so you will be quiet. But then if it's not scientifically justified, if you don't have a biological hypothesis, then I think we're doing wrong.
Makes life difficult. Yeah. Okay. So, are we at the end of our discussions? Are you satisfied? Is it? I'm satisfied. I'm, as I said in the beginning, I'm impressed by MARLON as, in fact, it is a feasibility study on what is possible and what may not be possible. And I think it's a project from which we can learn a lot. Maybe the expectations at the very beginning were higher. I was really hoping to get more quantitative data on exposure, which was very problematic apparently. But on the whole, I think it's a very good project, and I want to compliment you all on this. And thanks for your input. It's been very helpful here. And some of you will come back tomorrow for the follow-up. So thanks a lot, and have a nice evening.
Regarding tomorrow, I just have some practical tips and advice. So please fill in the evaluation questionnaires. Sorry for bothering you this, but it's very important for the reports and the deliverables of the project. So regarding tomorrow, we will have here the workshop for policymakers, and in the next room, the workshop for specialists. So it starts at, the registration starts at 9, and we will be happy to have you here. If you didn't register for any of those and you still want to come, or if you want to switch, please let us know via the phone. Okay? Thank you.
Is Alison still there?
No, she left.
She left. Too bad. Yes. If you speak to her, thank her.
Yes.
Sure,
sure.
Sí, lo voy a venir.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you.
Good job with the technical things. I think the introduction is a little session right now, and I needed to create it's really stressful, like.